Hi guys and welcome back. In this video, we'll be talking about Lambda functions. Lambda functions are used to get inputs, do a small amount of processing, and return outputs. Functions can do two things. They can perform an action, or they can return an output, or they can do both. For example, the print function is one that performs an action. It shows something to the user, but it doesn't really modify the data it receives and give you some new data. However, if you have a function such as this divide function, which takes two numbers and processes them and returns some output, this could be a good function to use in a Lambda function. The print function, though, would not be. That is because Lambda functions are used to take inputs and return outputs. If you wanted to rewrite this function, which at the moment is a normal function, into a Lambda function, you can do this. Here we are creating the Lambda function, and we are assigning it to the divide variable. If we do this, we no longer need this. The structure of the Lambda function is as follows, and I appreciate it's a bit confusing because of its short nature and the amount of symbols involved. You've got the Lambda keyword, then you've got a space, then you've got a list of parameters. So these are the inputs to the function. Here we've got two different inputs, one called x and one called y. Then after a colon, you have the return value of the function. So this function here takes two inputs and returns the division of the two. So again, it is identical to this function here, because this one also takes two inputs and returns their division. This one also returns their division, even though it doesn't have an explicit return statement. This is what Lambda functions do. So, because it's got the divide name, you can still call it as you would any other function. Just call it with the brackets and put the values in there, and you get 5.0. Now, something interesting about Lambda functions is what happens if you don't assign a variable to them. Well, Python will create this function and immediately destroy it. If there is no name associated with this function, Python realizes that you can't use this function anywhere else because you have no way of referring to it, so it will immediately destroy it. However, you can call this function like this. This is even more confusing, and I would almost never do this. But here you use brackets to tell Python that you want to run this code first. You create the function, and then now that you have this function, you can use the bracket notation to call it and pass in two values. Remember that this is identical to doing this if the divide function was already defined. But because it's not, you can do this, and that defines the function, and then the brackets signify that you want to call it and give it two values. Now notice that if you run this, the function does evaluate, but nothing gets printed out, so you will have to chuck this into a print statement, which makes it even more confusing. Now you get 5.0 back, but this code is pretty crap code, because there are a lot of brackets, symbols, things going on in a single line that frankly don't have to be in one line. You could define this in another line and make this a bit more readable, make it a bit clearer what's going on. So what is the purpose of Lambda functions? Lambda functions can, at times, provide more simplicity to code. However, just as you've seen there, they can also at times make it more complicated. So you do have to be careful with Lambda functions when you're using them. Let's look at an example. Here we've got some code where we define a function called average that takes in any arbitrary sequence and returns the sum of its elements divided by the length of the sequence. So, for example, if we iterate over our list of students, we can then call the average function with each student's grades. And what that is going to do is it's going to take these grades, and then these, and then these, and then these, and it's going to calculate the average of each, and it's going to print it out. Pause the video for a moment if you need a bit more time to look at this code and thoroughly understand it. Just as we have defined our average function here, we could make this into a Lambda function if we think that's going to make things simpler. I think that certainly is not going to make them more complicated, so maybe you could do something like this. This behaves in exactly the same way because this is a function that still takes in a parameter and then adds it all together and divides it by its length. However, it's fairly uncommon in Python to use Lambda functions in this way. That's because when you have a function that's sitting on its own and you're assigning it to a variable, you might as well just define a normal function. It makes it a little bit more readable. So while you can do this, and this is one of those use cases where you might use a Lambda function, there are better scenarios for using Lambda functions. So we're going to look at some of those in the next video. For now though, I just wanted to tell you about the Lambda function structure and syntax, which is the Lambda keyword followed by any parameters, then the colon, and then the return value of the function. And remember, Lambda functions are used for getting inputs and returning outputs, and they're not used for performing actions, such as what the print function does. Thanks for joining me in this video, and I'll see you in the next one.